Hi there! In this video we'll explore medieval urban design, or rather how medieval towns actually looked, since design might be a bit too strong a word in this context. Rivers and other bodies of water were a crucial factor in the foundation of many medieval cities. These waterways were important for transportation of goods, fishing, and powering mills. Just before the defensive walls, there were stinky and dirty suburbs. People living there were dealing with slaughtering and skinning animals, processing animal fat, and other similar dirty duties. The suburbs were usually situated near the gate leading to the urban quarters. Often blacksmiths also resided outside the city walls in the suburbs. I talked quite a bit about defensive walls in the video on medieval castles. Feel free to check it out if you'd like to learn more, or if you just have some extra time to spare. The city was divided into districts occupied by specific social classes and professional specializations. The area near the city walls was often home to butchers, but also carpenters and wheelwrights. The buildings in this area were usually small and constructed almost haphazardly, with low-quality wood. In the far corners of the city, we could find orphanages and shelters, often protected by religious orders. Interestingly, university buildings were usually also located on the outskirts of the city. This imaginary city is a typical medium-sized settlement with about 5,000 inhabitants. To be honest, it feels a bit too small to realistically support university buildings, but for the sake of this video, I'll include one anyway. The main roads were wide and well-maintained, often paved with stones or logs, but the majority of streets were narrow and muddy. The grander streets were equipped with gutters for drainage, while in the case of smaller ones, wastes were either channeled through wooden gutters or simply thrown out of windows. The street grid emerged quite organically, following paths tramped by humans, animals, and wagons, with buildings constructed alongside them. This is why many medieval streets are so winding. However, on rare occasions, cities were built in new locations based on planned designs, resulting in much more regular street grids. The wealthiest residents of the city usually lived near the main square, and their tenement houses were the tallest and most ornate. Poorer merchants and artisans typically sold their goods in stalls outside public buildings. The city's elite were often clothiers, so their commercial buildings were often the most lavish, second only to the city hall, which served as the seat of administrative and judicial authorities, as well as archives. In the basement of the city hall, there was a jail and a torture chamber. Sometimes, in the lack of a proper city hall, council meetings were held in taverns. The main square feels like a bit of a waste of a precious space, so here is a pillory. It could be located near the town hall. Could be either a simple wooden pole or elaborately carved out of stone. Here is a pillory in Wrocław, Poland. How did it work actually? Convicts were chained to the pillory and exposed to public humiliation. They were insulted and pelted with rotten vegetables, eggs, and even horse droppings, if they were lucky. For more serious crimes, they were scourged or even executed on the spot. Another, even more important feature in the main square was a source of water, a well or a pump. It could be also massive and richly decorated. In European cities, a church with a bell tower was often situated at the corner of the market square, serving as an important observation and information point. The church bells would ring to inform people about significant events and dangers. A good idea was providing a space for so-called fish market, where smelly goods were sold, somewhere near one of the gates. Now let's focus on the tenement houses flanking narrow medieval streets. There were two very characteristic construction techniques, and both looked exactly the same after plastering. In both cases, the construction was made of wooden beams and poles. The wall filling could be made of bricks in the case of Prussian walls, or a combination of clay, sand, straw and animal dung in the case of the wattle-and-daub technique. Massive beams were used on the foundation and on the top of the poles. Horizontal beams could also be added right under and over the windows. The poles were placed quite densely, every 1 or 1.5 meters, and corners were strengthened with diagonal beams. In the case of medieval buildings, more is more. Roofs in the Middle Ages were typically steeply sloped, often with an angle of 45 degrees or greater. The most common roofing materials were ceramic tiles, slate or wooden shingles. Dormer windows added a special charm and could be shaped in many different ways. Chimneys were also an important feature of medieval houses, as many rooms required their own fireplace for heating. They were usually grouped together, as shown in this example. Although this drawing is from my imagination, chimneys in wealthy households could indeed be quite extravagant. However, in some cases, roofs were equipped only with a louver for ventilation. Buildings had to be squeezed into a small area within the city walls, so the streets were very narrow. This technique is called jetting and allowed for extra living space. It's important to note that jetting needs to be supported by densely laid horizontal beams. Ground floors of townhouses were often used for commercial purposes. It's estimated that in medieval Europe, up to 90% of people was illiterate, so visual signs played a crucial role in communication. They informed about the location of a business, the type of goods and services offered, and sometimes even prices. In medieval times, windows were typically unglazed. Instead, wooden shutters were used to keep out the cold and rain. Occasionally, thin animal bladders or parchment were used to cover the windows. When soaked in oil, they became somewhat transparent. During the late Middle Ages, the wealthiest individuals were finally able to afford glazed windows. However, the glass pieces were often small, thick, and resembled the bottoms of bottles. Windows in medieval houses were often small and located high up on the walls to maximize privacy and security. The design of the windows varied greatly depending on the region, weather conditions, and the wealth of the homeowner.